I chose these particular verses. But as I studied them and I looked at them, I think that they spoke to me, and I hope they will speak to you this morning. The verses are found in Psalm chapter 55, just the first 7 verses. And this is what David the psalmist wrote about the work of Psalm 55 and how it was supposed to be presented. He said, "To the choir master, with stringed instruments, a maskil of David, give ear to my prayer, O God, and hide not yourself from my plea for mercy. Attend to me and answer me. I am restless in my complaint, and I moan, because of the noise of the enemy, because the oppression of the wicked, for they drop trouble upon me, and in anger they bear a grudge against me. My heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen upon me. Fear and trembling come upon me, and horror overwhelms me. And I say, oh, that I had wings like a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. Yes, I would wander far away. I would lodge in the wilderness." And it ends with a phrase that often we find in the Psalm, Selah. And I'll explain that a little bit more to you later. I think of all of the things that we can safely assume, I think we can safely assume that David was a man of great passion and emotion. He was the youngest of 7 brothers, or 8 brothers, depending upon how you count them up. We know him because he's known by most people as being handsome and having a ruddy complexion. He had a red face. That kind of face, it's easy for us to look at and assess what kind of emotions are going through somebody. It's not a face that hides emotions well. When a person who is prone to red faces get angry, his face gets angry. When he laughs, his face gets red. When he's enjoying a joke or whatever, his face gets red. David was one of those kind of guys. He was also spontaneous. The very first time he goes to be with the nation of Israel, the armies of Israel, he comes across a giant out in the field cursing God and cursing the Israelites, a giant named Goliath. People who think don't react very quickly. I had 2 sons, or I have 2 sons. Both of them played goalie in hockey when they played. One of my sons thinks through everything. Everything has to have a purpose and a reason and a direction. And so when the puck is shot at him, he knows where he wants to be in the net, where he wants the puck to be guided, and he tries his hardest to follow through on that plan. My other son, my youngest son, is the total natural. He doesn't care where the puck's coming from, or who's shooting it, or where it's going, or what the score is. He'll take the stick and throw it, or he'll throw his glove, or any way that he can. He'll try and get rid of it. He was more spontaneous than others, and I think David had that kind of spontaneity. As soon as he heard about this giant in the field threatening the nation of Israel, he said, I'll go. I'll be the one that fights against him. Who's going to go with me? And when nobody said they'd go with me, then he said, I'd go alone. It was kind of an interesting kind of choice for a young man to be able to do that. But he was able not only to just slay the giant, but he was also able to rouse the forces of Israel, and that they chased the nation of the Philistines out of their land. He was a soldier for much of his life. He was somebody that other soldiers would follow. They weren't afraid. When David said, let's go into this area, we're going to attack this area and do these things, the people who were following him had their trust in him. They served him even to the point where some of them risked their lives simply to get a glass of water for David to drink, while David was hiding in one of the caves in that area of Israel where he was at. And David, in his spontaneity and in his emotion, took that cup of water and poured it on the ground as a drink offering before the Lord and said, this is unworthy for me. This is the blood of those men that I have been leading. How in the world could they care so much about me? I need to care about them as well. David was also a poet. He was a composer. He was a musician. Talk about all sorts of giftings. David had all of these giftings, things that drew people to him in some ways. Sometimes it was soldiers who followed him. Sometimes it was poets who followed him. He wrote over half of the Psalms that we have. Some of these Psalms were simply his prayers to God, but some of them also contained a heart-to-heart message that David wanted to give to people who didn't understand and know God in the same way he did. And so he carefully crafted certain messages. And this one, Psalm 55, is one of those crafted messages. It's written to the choir master, to somebody with a specific gift and a specific talent within the church. He was given to the choir master because this psalm David wanted to have repeated again and again and again. He didn't just want to be an extemporaneous prayer time or whatever. He wanted people to say, oh, I know that song. I know that tune. It's a maskil. It's a song of David. And it talks about all of the things that I'm experiencing. It's shared with a number of stringed instruments. So not only was David able to identify the instruments that he wanted, but he was able to make sure that there was music written for them so that people would become familiar with the tune and familiar with the song. It's interesting as we read through the Psalms of David, how many of them have a similar message to them, and it's very simple to follow and understand. The start of the psalm is David crying his eyes out, saying, Lord, why have you forsaken me? Why have you left me behind? Why are my enemies around me? Why am I in trouble all of the time? And that would be the way that he starts most of the psalms that he has. But you'll also notice that he doesn't leave it there. He ends with God being his helper, his host, his encouragement, and blessing him in the end. A pouring out of sorrows followed by the answer from God. An answer that is good. We've done a number of Bible studies looking at the people of Israel in captivity in Persia. And as we've done that, we've noticed a few things about what was happening in the lives of those people. One of the main characters that comes out of that time was a man named Daniel. You've heard of him, perhaps. He was one of those men who stood out so much in his community that he was raised to a high rank. At one point in Daniel's lifetime, he was in Persia, and the Persian king named Nebuchadnezzar decided that he wanted a little bit of worship coming his way. So he built a 20 meter tall statue of himself. And it was interesting how he got people to pay attention to it. He said, every time you hear a music, a particular kind of music, because it's going to come from a variety of instruments, from zithers and stringed instruments, all the way to bagpipes, if we understand the translations well enough to know that. But there's a whole gamut of things that are necessary. When anybody was to hear that song, they were to fall on their knees and worship Nebuchadnezzar as not only as king, but some sort of deity that deserved worship. But Daniel was different. From the very time that Daniel was a young man, he had heard this psalm, Psalm 55. He had heard the sound of the choir master that he had made with the voices that were there. He had heard the sound of the instruments that were there. And when David looked at that, he said, when Daniel looked at that, he said, why should I worship this king? When really, I remember what God says to me. He says, if you will worship the Lord your God, you're going to be blessed and helped. Only Daniel and his friends refused to kneel before this statue. And it was because Daniel had already in his mind, had a tune of hope, a tune of instruction from God. Whenever you hear this message, I think David wanted to tell his people, whenever you hear these sounds, I want you to think about your Lord. I want you to think about your God. It's time to worship. So David writes this in this maskil. Maskil is another word for a musical song. He says, give ear to my prayer, O God, and hide not yourself from my plea for mercy. Attend to me and answer me. I am restless in my complaint, and I moan because of the noise of the enemy. Have you ever felt that God has forgotten you, or that God has forgotten about the troubles that you have in your life? I think if I was to be honest with you, you'd probably be shocked at the number of times I feel out of control in my life. Maybe you don't. I appreciate that. But for most people, there will come a point in their lives when they look up to God and say, help. Help me, Lord. David is having a meltdown. He's having a time in his life where he's saying, God, hide me not yourself from my plea for mercy. I need you. And I am restless in my complaint, and I moan. Sometimes it's all right to feel this way. Nobody wants this in their lives. We don't want to have the suffering and the problems and the hard times come into our life. We wish it was all easy, and we wish it was all simple. We wish it was all blessing, but it isn't. Sometimes the circumstances will lead us into good things. Sometimes the circumstances in the hand of God will lead us into hard times. But I think the key that we see in this writing from David is he says, it's only temporary. It's only going to last for a short while. For those who believe and trust in God will not languish in the pit of trouble, but they will be able to ascend even above that. Now, certain people struggle with understanding the scriptures in that way. Some people that we've seen in ministry will look at a person and say, what are you upset about? What are you angry about? You should just get up and be strong and don't do those things. Trust me, for some people, that's harder than it is for other people. Some people need extra support and extra help. Their nature, the nature of these people, their makeup, the situation they find themselves in, the resources, as we sit around praying for people on a weekly basis, we recognize some people are going through life and death issues in their lives and in their hearts and in their bodies. And we just are amazed at how resilient they really are. But it doesn't make it any easier for those people who are struggling. When Joyce and I traveled with a group of about 10 Gen Xers to Africa, we decided that we were going to look after each other. But because the time was short, we were going to try and fit a lot of things into it, so there was very little time left for this kind of reflection. And we developed a set of letters which was to remind us about that. The letters are S-I-U-P or S-I-U-S. I don't know if anybody knows what they mean, but simply they mean suck it up, princess, or suck it up, suck it up, princess, suck it up. Okay.
Prince.
Prince. Prince, whatever. It was interesting. Some of the people we were traveling with thought that was the greatest thing in the world. It was wonderful. Yeah, tell me that. Give me some hard love from. And some people went, oh, that's the worst thing that anybody's ever said to me. But to be honest with you, if you want to accomplish things in your life, you need to be able to get past that first step. And what we learned on that little travel together is that if we chose to care for each other with tough, realistic love, we would be able to see changes in their lives and changes in the community they were witnessing to. But remember, not everybody is wired the same way. And for some people, a pat on the back will do, and some people, other pats on other areas of our bodies, harder will do as well. Some people need more support than others, but it's also a good opportunity for introspection. David has gone to the wall, and the breaking point of his faith is right before him, and his call out is to God. His call out is to God, saying, God, I am at my breaking point. And he admits to God and he admits to his peers his great need. It's okay. As long as you don't languish in that end. As long as you don't say, well, this is all God has for me. We become like Eeyore the donkey in the Winnie the Pooh books. Oh, everything is bad. Oh, everything is miserable. Oh, I'm so unhappy. That's not the way God wants us to approach these things, if we can. And so encourage and pray for each other. David goes on to say this, my heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen upon me. Fear and trembling come upon me, and my horror overwhelms me. And I say, oh, that I had wings like a dove. We should also ask ourselves where we are in our relationship with God. David's message to us is that at certain points in life, we can feel and perhaps are hemmed in by forces that we cannot control, that are hurting us. They seem to drop from the sky, and they're uncontrollable and unhelpful for us. Joyce and I moved to a house in Fairview, Alberta, having lived in Stony Plain for a number of years. We bought what we would consider to be a dream house. It was built on a double-sized lot, 14 different kinds of trees on the lot, heated garage. We had a garden spot that was a quarter of one of the double lots that we were on. The house was built just not modern and not wonderfully, but it was built to the best of the person's ability, and it showed. It was very easy to get around and very easy to enjoy. We had a lot of good times of prayer and sharing and fellowship there. It was great. One of the first springs we were there, though, we were finishing up in the garden and finishing up a little bit of weeding, and we looked, and this thundercloud was coming our way, and we thought, maybe we'll have to worry about this, maybe not, but let's finish the weeding anyway. So we started to try and finish the weeding, and the rain started. I shouldn't say the rain started. It was more like somebody had taken a giant bathtub and turned it over on us, and we were immediately soaked to the bone. And we looked and we thought, well, if we run to the house, we're going to get more soaked. Let's seek shelter in the trees behind us. So we went into the trees that were on the north end of our garden and stood there for a bit, only to realize that those trees didn't hold any water back. In fact, they made it worse. It seemed to funnel down harder and harder upon us. And so we decided, well, maybe it's time to run toward the house. Well, we'll wait a minute or two for the storm to abate a little bit, so we waited. And finally, we were so wet and so cold that we decided that we'd run the 30 yards to the house, which we did. Got into the house, and our clothes were all messy and wet, and I decided I needed something out of the garage. So I ran across to get a tool out of the garage, or a vacuum or something, and I opened the door to the garage only to realize that our backyard was now 6 inches underwater, the whole area. And when I opened the door to the garage, the water just surged in and kept on coming. And we're trying to keep the water from encroaching on the basement, and trying to keep the garage from floating away, and trying to keep our garden from being wrecked, and trying to keep from yelling at each other, which sometimes wives and husbands do, from each other that, stop the rain. I'll try, but I don't think I can. We kind of, you get to that point in your life where all those things are happening to you, and you just look up to God and say, you aren't really fair. You think you're fair, but it doesn't seem like you're fair to us. And you know what? The sun broke through. and it always breaks through. But I tell you, when you're going through the midst of that valley and trying to fight pools of water taking you away, it's not fun. The city of Fairview is built on an incline, and all the water that collects on the north end of town runs toward the Peace River, which is closer to the south end of town. And I took a look at one of these pathways going down the lane, and literally it was rapids bad enough that I was worried that if a child got caught in them, they'd be swept out to wherever kind of thing. So it was pretty severe and pretty bad. But life isn't fair. Some of you will never have to face that kind of problem. Some of you will never have to face those kind of cares. Some of you will have to do double and triple what others do. And we look to God and say, why? Why is this happening to us? David says this. He says, and I say, oh, that I had wings like a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. Yes, I would wander away and would lodge in the wilderness. Some people seek for answers. David stands as an example of that. He says, I am so frustrated and angry and hurt and troubled by the situation I'm in. Oh, I wish I could sprout wings and fly away to a place where they wouldn't bother me or give me any problems at all. David stands as an example of how to endure severe circumstances. And what we see in David is him facing trials honestly. Not that David was a perfect person. He was like us. He did some great things. He certainly wrote some tremendous words when it comes to the Psalms. But he was also a man. And because he was a man, he sinned. And we sometimes hear from people who say, well, the reason why people go through trouble is because of the sin in their lives. But I don't believe that to be true. I just simply mean that God cares and loves us and wants the best for us. And how he chooses for us to show him our best, we leave up to him. David even escapes from his life by sinning. He sins with his best friend's wife. And then he causes his best friend's death. And then he sits back and says, aren't I wonderful? I solved all my problems. And it's only with a friend of his named Nathan who comes beside him and challenges him about the true nature and the consequences of his sin. Sin is simply an escape that we use to escape from the things that we don't want to do for God. And God wants us to understand and know that obedience to him is the way. Obedience to him is the life. And we need to somehow find a way of dealing with those real events in a real important way. We need to allow ourselves to be instructed by the things that brought into our life. God will give us a way out. We have choices to make in our lives. For some of us, it's easy. My dad smoked for 40 years, 2 packs a day, no filters. And one day he said, I'm going to quit. And we all laughed at him. And he never smoked another cigarette again. That's the power of our will. Our will is the only thing that separates us from eternal life in heaven with God. If we would only believe, if we would only trust, that's the guarantee of the scriptures. But for people who say, oh, I'm a self-made man, I don't need this garbage, it's for women and children and weak people, but it isn't. It's designed by God to give everybody a fair chance and an opportunity. We have choices to make in our life. Suck it up, princess, or suck it up, sister, is not so much meant as a command as it is to be an invitation. An invitation for us to trust and keep on trusting. I said I'd look at the word Selah as we close our time together. Selah is an interesting word. We find it again and again and again in the Psalms. we're not sure, but we think that it's simply an opportunity to pause. In some cases, it's an opportunity for the musical instruments to keep on going for a little bit, maybe playing a tune or doing other things. I think it even has a deeper meaning than that. And I believe that the word Selah is in there, and it is God's way of saying to us, stop, rest, relax. Think about what's going on around you. Accept from me my guidance and my help, and I will continue to bless you. And so I believe that every time we see Selah, God is simply saying to us, think about it. Think about it. May God bless His word to us today. We're going to sing a hymn in closing. You're welcome to remain seated or stand to join us. We'll pause before the last verse.